Meantime, Prime Minister Dr. Kenny Anthony, in presenting the budget, said government remains strongly committed to ensuring that St. Lucia's fiscal position becomes more sustainable. Dr. Anthony reported that there was a marked improvement in the fiscal operations of central government in 2014-2015. The overall deficit narrowed to $138.8 million in 2014-2015 compared to $213.5 million in 2013-2014. A current account surplus of $43.1 million was recorded. Total revenue and grants increased by 5.2% to $970.4 million. The bulk of growth was led by higher collections of both VAT and taxes on income and profits. Receipts from VAT rose by 12.4% to $335.9 million and now account for more than a third of current revenue for government.
This improvement in VAT collections reflects the change in the rate of VAT on hotels and related services from 8% to 10%, effective April 2014, and the narrowing of the VAT exempt list. Mr. Speaker, improved collections of taxes on income and profits reflect growth in corporate tax, as signs are emerging of some improvements in that sector. Now let us turn to expenditures. Total expenditure of the central government fell by 2.4% to $1,109.2 million in 2014-15, driven by a 12.3% decline in capital expenditures to $235.4 million. The decline in capital expenditure was not deliberate, as this government recognizes the vital importance of increasing capital spending to drive growth prospects. Lower capital expenditure was driven mainly by slower than expected pace of construction work on the St. Jude Hospital due to later than anticipated disbursement of funds from a loan granted by the Republic of China, Taiwan. A key pillar of the strategy to restore fiscal sustainability is the containment of growth in current expenditures. Further strides were made in that regard, with current spending remaining largely contained and increases driven largely by unavoidable expense related to interest payments on the debt stock and transfers. Consequently, current expenditure rose marginally by 0.7% to $873.8 million in 2014-2015.
Dr. Anthony said while there were encouraging signs with the island's fiscal recovery, specifically the deficit, there is much more to be done.
First and foremost, the overall deficit remains above our targeted level. Secondly, the recurrent account is still in deficit, which implies that we have to continue to borrow to repay our debt obligations, albeit at much lower levels than the past 2 years. It should be noted that spending on interest payments is at about $145 million. The only way to reduce this bill is by borrowing less and finding alternative ways to finance our development. Despite the improvements in the fiscal position, as will be articulated more precisely later, the borrowing requirement of the government remains very high, above prudent and sustainable levels. The quantum of market debt which we have to accumulate to finance the budget remains elevated. We have to reduce this pace of borrowing, and for this reason, we have to continue to manage our finances carefully and prudently.
An accepted wage freeze in the public service, Dr. Anthony reiterated, will help contain expenditure in the future, but it does not resolve the fiscal imbalances, and as such went on to announce new tax measures to help offset the situation.
Changes to the VAT regime, including an increase in the VAT threshold to $400,000. Raising the customs service charge rate on imports from 5% to 6%. Raising the charge on fuel purchased by Lucelec by 50 cents. reform of the annual vehicle license fees regime, and overhaul of the personal income tax system to increase the progressiveness of the system and reduce the tax burden of low and middle income earners. Mr. Speaker, these measures were assessed within the context of regional and international best practices. The proposed changes are also designed to allow for minimal disruptions to the public while allowing St. Lucia's tax system to remain competitive and buoyant.
Prime Minister Dr. Kenny Anthony there.